अजीज व अहमद मासूम पर दुरूद पढ़ो। अली व फातिमा मगमूम पर दुरूद पढ़ो। हसन हुसैन से मजलूम पर दुरूद पढ़ो। तमाम इमाम मासूम पर दुरूद पढ़ो। मोहे बोचार द मासूम पर दुरूद पढ़ो। ये वो दुरूद है रूहुल अमी जिसे लाया खुदा की सिमत से तोहफा रसूल को आया। इसी दुरूद ने नारे शकर को बुझवाया। इसी दुरूद ने रास्ता इल्म का दिखलाया। मोहे बोचार द मासूम पर दुरूद पढ़ो। अगर है मद नजर ये के शाद हो बारी रखो दुरूद को हरदम जबान पर जारी। पढ़ो दुरूद तो फूले लहद में फुलवारी। पढ़ो दुरूद तो हो दूर दिल की अंधियारी। मोहे बोचार द मासूम पर दुरूद पढ़ो। दुरूद पढ़ के पुकारा कलम दमेर का अमीन रोक लो अब तो सने जुबां की लगाम। रसूल फातिमा जहरा है और 12 इमाम। ये वो बुजुर्ग है जो लायक दुरूद और सलाम। मोहे बोचार द मासूम पर दुरूद पढ़ो।
رحم الله من يقرأ سورة الفاتحة. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. الحمد لله رب العالمين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين، واللعنة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه الحكيم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إنا أعطيناك الكوثر. آمنا بالله، صدق الله العلي العظيم. اللهم صل على محمد. Your second salawat for love of Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. And your loudest salawat as condolences to the master of our time, Sahib al-Asri wa Zaman. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa أعظم الله أجورنا وأجوركم بذكرنا المصائب آل Muhammad. May Allah increase in our reward for the commemoration of the difficulties of Ahlul Bayt. Last night we began our discussion by talking about the reality of the Shahadat of Sayyidah Fatima is not a historical fact, but rather a fact that is associated with the philosophy of faith, and that one who doesn't understand this concept has not understood an important portion of faith. Continuing in this process where we address this idea that Rasulullah is given khayr al-kathir in his daughter and given a great goodness in his daughter, the same way that Rasulullah is rahmatul lil alameen, then his daughter has to have an impact on us as well too. And in this night and tomorrow night, we'll talk about the impact that Sayyidah Zahra has left for us in this world, both tonight in the spiritual aspect and too in the physical aspect. When talking about the spiritual aspect of the impact of Bibi Fatima and her presence, it's important to understand that these personalities aren't just miraculous when they're present. They're miraculous even before their birth. And that her having a role in spirituality is a consequence of how she is brought into this world. And it's not normal, and it's something very unique. There's discussion that says that, and discussion in history, right? So let me explain something. There's a discussion in faith, and there's a discussion in history. There's a difference between these two. For example, a discussion in faith, when we talk about the children of Rasulullah, we say the consequential personality amongst the children of Rasulullah is Bibi Fatima. And we concentrate on this one person. We may mention that he had other sons, we may mention his sons at times, but for example, we gloss over many other points. Why? Because their relevance to faith is not significant. But in a historical context and conversation, there are historical contexts or discussions that talk about that did the Holy Prophet have 3 daughters born to him before Bibi Fatima? And in the realm of history and debate and discussion around history, we can't firmly say, no, that's impossible, nor can we say, yes, that definitely happened. So which is why in historical context, when I make the statement that the Prophet had other children, it's true the Prophet had other children, but none have a narrative about their birth the way Bibi Fatima does. Her narrative of her birth is something very unique, where it's narrated that our Prophet was commanded to fast for a period of 40 days and separate himself from Sayyidah Khadija and to move away from her and move Sayyidah Khadija to the house of Bibi Fatima bint Asad and stay alone and fast for a period of 40 days. And that at the end of those 40 days, his iftar that was sent for him was fruit sent or food sent from heaven. And what was unique about this meal was the instruction that it came with when it came from heaven that, oh Rasulullah, do not share this food with anyone. You see, the habit of our Prophet was very similar to the habit of Nabi Ibrahim. Nabi Ibrahim was someone who built his house near one of the major roadways. And whenever it would come time to a meal, he would actually stand outside of his house and wait on the roadway for any passerby to come to join and eat with him. Nabi Ibrahim did not like to eat alone. Neither did our Prophet. And he would make it a habit that whenever time for iftar would come, whenever he was about to eat, the door to his house would be opened and anyone passing by would be welcome to join him. But this meal came with a specific instruction: no, do not invite anyone to partake in this food. And as soon as you partake from this food, return back to your house and spend time with your wife. This instruction is the instruction that Rasulullah himself describes, that before the birth of Bibi Fatima, these were the instructions that he was given before she was welcomed into this earth. Now imagine that this is a process of self-purification. This is ibadat. This is a regimen. Who is it being given to? The Holy Prophet, the most pious man in existence, that before he receives this daughter in this earth, he has to go through this regimen. And then he describes and he says, what was given to me was an apple or a fruit from heaven. Even this, the description of this is something special. Where Jibreel, when he comes, he says, this is fruit from heaven that Allah has sent from you. Who is the one sending the gift? Allah. Who is the one receiving the gift? Rahmatul lil alameen, the best of humanity. Who is the one delivering the gift? It's Jibreel. And what is the gift? It's the fruit of heaven. Now this description of the fruit of heaven that was consumed by the Prophet for the birth of Bibi Fatima, sometimes it's considered that, oh, this was the nur of Zahra that was being given. No. This is simply the physical material of which Bibi Fatima was made. See, think about it, right? When a child is born, what are they born from? They're born from the food of this world. Bibi Fatima was not born from the food of this world. She was born from the fruits of heaven. Which is why one of her descriptions is Hawra Insiya, the angelic being in human form. The significance of this conversation, her spirit is something completely different. Her spirit is something even more greater than this. But even for this process for her to be born is a description of showing that she had a spiritual significance, and that even our Prophet is forced or instructed by Allah to go through a regimen to prepare for this spiritual entity, for this person to be present. To understand her spirituality is even another conversation. But before we get to that, there's 2 points important in learning in this lesson as well too. One, the concept of looking at the idea of ibadat and our behavior and its impact on our children and generations. To understand something, there's a discussion from some of our ulama that say you start becoming the person you will be as a father or a mother at the age of 15. That from then, the impact of your action starts to come out. This description of the Prophet changing his behavior is a description of the impact of our behavior on our children and how our actions mold our children and what we expect from them. And this isn't something that's scientifically far off. As a matter of fact, they've done studies and research to show that, for example, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is transferable to your child. What they did was they took people after the Iraq war and the conflict in Iraq, and then they looked at their children. And they found that their children were afraid of things they had never seen. And the fear that the child possessed was a consequence of the actions that the parents went through. That the parents actually transferred that stress, that issue, that fear onto their child, though the child has never experienced it. So when we talk about, for example, even our generations and preparing for our children and our next generations, part of that preparation is our character and our behavior. The other element to it is the same concept of consuming halal and being conscious of what is it that we're consuming. That whatever it is we're consuming is what makes that next generation. And that consciousness of halal, of cleanliness, of purity, the more we pay attention to this, the more goodness we pass on to the child and the expectation that we have of goodness from the child. And there are examples and discussions in this realm that go into very deep detail and very interesting discussions. But, briefly, tell you a story? Why not? There's an alim who says, I moved from one town to another, and when I moved to this new town, Muslim country, Muslim place, Muslim town, one town to another. He says, when I moved to this new town, and he writes in his memoir, he says, suddenly I found myself, I had no desire to pray. And I started thinking to myself, what changed that caused this for me to feel this way? And he started listing through all the things that he did and all the things that were going on in his life. And obviously with this change in his life, he felt that something had happened that gave him his desire to pray had disappeared. And he knew something went wrong. So eventually he narrowed down to a few selections. He says, eventually I realized I went to a new butcher. So I went to the butcher to see what does the butcher do. So he says, I stood across the street from the butcher and I watched and I observed. And I saw him, as he was in the process of sitting in his shop, his friend was sitting with him and they were talking and so on and so forth. And in the middle of talking, someone came up and asked him, I would like a chicken. And he said, okay. And he went and grabbed the chicken. In the middle of continuing his conversation, he says, and that's so-and-so ta. And he cuts the chicken. Meaning he didn't take the name of Allah. He didn't mention the name of Allah. He didn't do all the things that he was supposed to. As a Muslim, he's a Muslim. But he ignored the responsibility of this, and the consequence was felt in the behavior of this one individual. Of this alim is realizing that me not being careful about this one thing, how it impacted my spirituality. The lesson Allah is teaching through this entire story and the narrative of her birth being completely different, and her purity and the material that she's made from is from heavenly material, is what you consume is what you give your child, is what you make your generations out of. The more we go through the process of purifying the genetic material and the physical material, the better the generations we want will turn out. The famous story of Allama Hilli. Allama Hilli as a boy is at the age of 7 or 8. His father's inside of the masjid. Allama Hilli is outside. Allama Hilli's father walks out. He sees his son playing with the shoes in the masjid. My child's not the kind of kid who plays with shoes. So he says, what are you doing? He says, Baba, I'm separating the shoes of the people of heaven from the shoes of the people of hell. His father says, uh-oh. He runs to the market, buys yogurt, comes back and puts a spoon of yogurt in his son's mouth. Yogurt. I'm not making up the word. The term literally in the story is yogurt. And after the kid eats that one spoon of yogurt, the father asks, now can you see the difference? And he says, Baba, I can't see the difference anymore. That yogurt is not haram. But the idea that's being conveyed by this description of that child, other than the fact that he's incredibly special, is that the level of care that was given into the food that was brought into that house was so much that the physical representation of spiritual status was being seen in material items. Now, I'm not saying we need to achieve that level. That is generations of preparation that brought that conclusion. But in our lifetime, what is the preparation that we do? And that's the consciousness of being careful about the food that we consume and paying attention to what the sources of food are, what the sources of income are, and paying attention to these different details of staying away from those things that are doubtful to improve whatever spirituality we have to a greater impact. The precedent is set in the story of Bibi Fatima, that her creation is not from the food of this world. Her creation is from the food of heaven. When it comes to her spirit itself, there's a narration from our sixth Imam where he's describing, and he says, the Nur of Sayyidah was worshipping Allah before even the heavens and earth were created. Sudayr al-Sayrafi is the name of the companion. He asks, then he says, Yabna Rasulullah, then are you saying that Bibi Fatima wasn't a human being? Right? Look at the question that he's asking. He's not doubting the fact that the Imam is telling him that Bibi Fatima was worshipping Allah before the creation of the heavens and the earth. But an insan is someone who was made, inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa. Insan and the creation of insan is after the establishment of the earth. So he sees, look at the thoughtfulness of the question of Sudayr. Sudayr's thoughtfulness is what? He says, I'm listening to the Imam tell me that Bibi Fatima worshipped Allah before the creation of the heavens and the earth. But what I'm struggling with is that insan came afterwards and she was a human being, wasn't she? Or was she not? And then the Imam elaborates, he says, this was the ruh, the spirit of Fatima, not that body that you saw on this earth. And then he continues further and he says, well then what was, for example, the nourishment of the soul of Bibi Fatima? And this becomes an interesting discussion where Imam Sadiq then explains and he says, the nourishment of the soul of Bibi Fatima was the dhikr of Allah. And the dhikr of Allah is what nourishes the soul. So the same way we talk about the nourishment of the body, there's an aspect of even the soul that needs nourishment, and that's the ibadat and worship of Allah. And this is why, when we talk about the spiritual element of Bibi Fatima, it's something that enlightens our soul and gives us instruction on how to improve and change our soul for the better. And as such, we'll mention 4 things about improving our soul as taught to us by Bibi Fatima, with your latest of salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The first of these things is probably, according to some, one of the most important things that you can talk about. And one of the most important things that we can do as a person, that we neglect ourselves. And this refers to, and alhamdulillah, I think there's stories with all of these. So you get 4 stories. The first of these talks about an event where, after one of the wars of Islam, where there were servants to be given to the houses, Imam Ali comes home one day and he finds Bibi Fatima that from carrying the water, she has marks on her body. From lighting the fire, she has, for example, marks on her hands. Her clothes have changed color from the difficulties. And he gives her a suggestion. He says, oh Fatima, why don't you go to your father and ask him to assign a servant to your house the way he is assigning to some other houses to help assist you in the housework. So, Sayyidah Fatima takes a suggestion from Imam Ali and goes to see the Holy Prophet, finds him busy talking to people in the masjid, becomes embarrassed and leaves. So she never asks him for anything. Imam Ali narrates, he says, the next day we heard someone call to us when we had gone to bed from our door, and we realized it was the Holy Prophet and we didn't want him to leave. So while we were still in bed, we called him to us and he came in and he sat by us. And he said, oh Fatima, you came to me and you wanted something, but you didn't speak to me. Imam Ali says that Sayyidah Fatima was too embarrassed to ask for anything in that moment, so he says, I elaborated, and he says that I told Sayyidah Fatima to come see you because of the difficulties of managing the household, and if there was a servant to assist her in the affairs of the household, to alleviate some of the difficulties on her. So Rasulullah replies and he says, "O Fatima, shall I give you something better than what would be a servant in your house?" She says, "Yes, please do." And Rasulullah teaches her the etiquette of reciting tasbih. 34 times say Allahu Akbar, 33 times say Alhamdulillah, and 33 times say Subhanallah. Thank you. Okay, stay awake now, all right? No, it's late, but we don't get to the end of the majlis if we fall asleep. And he says that this is better for you than the servant and anything in this world and what exists in it. To use this dhikr and to complete this dhikr. And that famously Imam Sadiq says that the finality of this dhikr is to end by saying La ilaha illallah one time. Now this tasbih that's given to her is one of the most important tools that we possess, that it's narrated, and there Imam Sadiq himself has a variety of narrations on the issue of tasbih. In one narration he says, one who recites this tasbih regularly, Allah will forgive his sins. One who recites this tasbih regularly, Jannah will become wajib upon him. One who recites this tasbih, he goes in specifically, he says, after your salat, one who finishes their prayer and before they move their legs, meaning extend their legs, if you recite this tasbih, Allah will answer your hajat, forgive your sins, and take care of your affairs for you, in many different narrations and structures. Talking about how significant this tasbih is. There's a narration of Imam Sadiq that goes even further. He says, we teach our children to recite tasbih the way you teach your children to pray. Meaning that prayer is, I mean, if you can get a 9-year-old to pray, we're like, Alhamdulillah, mashallah, Alhamdulillah, that's something to be proud of. He's saying we focus on the idea that beyond the prayer what comes next. In Mafatihul Jinan, there's a discussion around the taqibat, the mustahabbat that go with salat, the actions, the rituals that you associate with salat. And in it is a hadith from our sixth Imam where he says, I find it unusual that you take the time to come to the door, but you never ask for what you need. I said, Ya Rasulullah, what do you mean? He says, you finished your salat, you purified yourself, you came to Allah, you focused on Him, you opened, you came to the door of asking Him, and then you walked away. And the person says, well, how do we take advantage of this? And he says, go through the tasbih. The tasbih opens the door that your needs are answered through it. And don't separate yourself from this tasbih. It's something very beneficial. When we look at the concept of what is dhikr, what is the remembrance of Allah, it's a very interesting system. Let me explain this way, right? When I have a tree, I plant this tree. I want this tree to grow. I give it water and it grows. This means Allah created a special relationship between the plant and water. If I take this water and I change it, put oil, put any other liquid you can think of, and I put it in the tree, will the tree grow? No. Why? Because the uniqueness of the relationship is between water and the tree. The same way in spiritual terms, Allah has created relationships. In this, Allah has created a relationship between certain phrases that are adhkar and the fulfillment of our need. And when we have something that we want, one of the tools that we get to where we want and get to the things that we want is by utilizing the tool that Allah gave us. Sometimes we become surprised. I asked Allah, I didn't get. Well, Baba, what did you give the tree? Did you give it water or did you give it something else? The same concept applies in spirituality, that there are certain tools and keys that are given to us that when we utilize these keys, we achieve the goal that we intend. And this tasbih is one of those important goals that it is, for example, a key that fulfills and answers your hajat like a treasury. Now sometimes, for example, and this is, I'm going on tangents here, but hopefully you'll stay with me. I'll keep an eye on the clock too. We say that, okay, what's the significance of 34 and 33 and 33? They're dhikr of Allah, alhamdulillah. What if I want to say it 100 times? What if I want to say, for example, subhanallah 1,000 times? Okay. That's very true that each of these has its benefit and you can achieve the benefit. But there's a particular formula that's given. And that formula has a benefit as well too. And this is a point of discussion. Where some ulama say, ma'ku faraq. If you want to recite 34, recite 34, 35, 37, 50, 40, whatever you want to do, do. Just do the dhikr. The dhikr is important. And I say that these adhkar and their association is important. And other ulama come forward and say, no. These adhkar, in the numbers that they're apportioned to and how they're structured, is like looking at a treasure map. When you look at a treasure map, if you want to find the treasure, you have to follow the prescription and the steps exactly to come to the conclusion that you want. And therefore they push on the concept that this idea of 34, 33, 33 is very significant, that this collective brings us to the conclusion that we desire. But the end conclusion that we know is that had there been anything better than this dhikr on this earth, Allah would have given it to Bibi Fatima in that moment. And that He gives her this dhikr in this apportioned structure is one of the best things that exists in this earth. So for us to associate it with our salat, to look through it for our hajat, to make it a common practice in our household is one of the important values that we possess and one of the tools that we have that we benefit from on a regular basis. And there is no one who disagrees that this tasbih that we recite is tasbihatul Zahra, salamullahi alayha, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. In the same concept, in the practice of spirituality, the discussion of the ibadat of Bibi Fatima is something that Imam Hassan makes a statement. He says, "Ma wajadtu a'budu Abdullahi akthar min Ummi Fatima." I never found a worshipper of Allah who worshipped more than my mother Fatima did of Allah. They would describe and say that Bibi Fatima, and remember, her age is still young, that he describes and he says, my mother would stand in prayer of Allah in such a way until her feet would become swollen from the ibadat of Allah. Now the discussion of the time of her shahadat says that she was shaheed at no more than 18 years or 21 years of age, if not in that range. So to imagine the ibadat of someone in that young of an age who would worship Allah in such a way is amazing. But there's a secret to this ibadat that the Imam himself reveals. Now remember, Imam Hussain is not more than 7 years of age at the shahadat of his mother. And he narrates, he says, I would see my mother when I would go to sleep stand in prayer. And when I would wake up, I would find her in prayer still. He says, one night I listened to her and I heard her pray. And I heard her mention every single one of our neighbors and every single one of the mu'mineen. But I never heard her say anything in her dua, in her prayer for herself. Now, before we even get to the significance of the lesson and the secret here, one of the important elements, and this is leaning into tomorrow night's conversation, is the culture and the physical history of what, for example, the practical history of what Sayyidah Fatima left, is the culture of the household. And the culture of the household, talking about the idea that if you want your kids to pray, if they don't see you pray, they're not going to pray. If you want your kids to read Quran, and they don't see you read Quran, they're not going to read Quran. Every child wants to mature and wants to be seen as a mature individual. And let me tell you, it's not as exciting as it looks. Everyone who grows up wishes they could go back. But that idea of being mature is the child wants to do what they see the parents doing. If the parent isn't doing this action, then this is something only that children do, and if I want to grow up, I don't do this anymore. So if Quran, Salat, Ibadat become these actions that only we instruct children to do, but our children never see us doing these actions, it's not going to be a part of their lifestyle when they grow up. Your children do what you do. They become like you as you grow up. The significance of Imam Hassan mentioning this is showing what was the culture that was being inculcated in the household for the children to follow. If I want my kids to pray, they're going to see me pray. That's why one of the old school tactics of households in Najaf, and I heard this, I didn't see it, was that they said that when we wake up for Salat al-Layl, we wake up our children, we give them toys. So they get into the habit of being awake at that hour, and they get in the habit of seeing us awake at that time, and they get in the habit of being around Salat, to expose them to this process. Imam Hassan, returning back to the story, narrates and he says, I asked my mother, why did you not pray for yourself? And the famous answer that she gives is, Ya bunayya ajjar thumma dar. You pray for the neighbor, the companion, the environment, the people around you, before you pray for the people of the house. This is one of the secrets of salat as well too, and same thing of ibadat, that if you want to, for example, have your hajat answered, Allah promises, Allah says, if you pray for the mu'min brother without him asking you, I will give him and I will give you what I give to him. Ya Allah, give Muhammad Raza a Lamborghini, Ya Allah. Right? What's the significance? That Allah is promising, and this is the lesson that Sayyidah Fatima is teaching in this example of showing that your needs are met when you take care of others. The reality of this action that Sayyidah Fatima performs is even more difficult than that. Right? There's a statement that our teachers used to tell us, that they said, you have not found Iman until you pray in your Salat al-Layl for the one who harms you. That the idea of praying for your neighbor, for your community, that's sometimes easier. But when there's someone who, for example, in my community or people that I know, and just by the nature of reality, that we live in a community, we're going to have conflict. There's no community that exists without conflict. But when I can take that person who causes conflict and pain to me and I can make them a part of my salat, now I've come to Iman. Now I've come to faith. Now I've come to the process that when I ask for something, it has weight. Why? Because I looked past myself and my limitation, and I asked Allah truthfully and sincerely. The same is true in the situation where Bibi Fatima is teaching in salat. You want your salat accepted? You want your du'as accepted? Start your du'a with everybody else. Exert your energy on them. Let Allah decide what is best for you instead of you deciding what I need from Allah. And that's the fulfillment in this process. The third of the lessons of spirituality that we learn from Sayyidah Fatima, with your latest wa salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. This is one of the fun stories to tell kids. This refers to a story where a man comes to our Holy Prophet, comes to the masjid and says, I need to speak to the Prophet. They point him to the Prophet, he comes, and the Prophet asks him, what's your issue? He says, I've heard that you're the Prophet here and I'm in need of assistance. He says, what do you need? He says, I was on a journey, and along the journey I lost my horse, I lost all my wealth, I lost my food, I lost my clothes, and I need to get home. I need resources to do this. Now Rasulullah says to him, he says, I don't have anything to give you myself right now, but Allah rewards the one who guides to assistance the same as the one who gives assistance. So meaning, whether or not if I help you find what you need, I'll get the same reward as if I gave it to you myself. And he says, go to the house of Fatima. The man comes to the house of Bibi Fatima and calls from the door and says that the Prophet sent me, I'm in need of a horse, I'm in need of clothing, I'm in need of food, I'm in need of money. Bibi Fatima says, there's nothing in my house except the beds that my children sleep on. Would this help you? And he says, that won't help me. It won't produce the income I need to be able to pay all my expenses. And then she remembers that she has a necklace that was given to her on her wedding. And she says, takes off the necklace and says, will this necklace help you if you are able to sell it? He says, this will be enough for me to buy a horse, clothes, food, and have money for my journey. So she says, take it and go and use it as you need. And as he leaves, he goes to the market to look to find someone to buy it, and he finds Ammar ibn Yasir, and Ammar ibn Yasir asks him, did you find what you were needing at the house of Bibi Fatima? I heard you came to the Prophet and he sent you there. And the man says, I received this necklace. Ammar looks at the necklace and he says, would you sell it to me? And the man says, yeah, I need money for this, that, and the other thing. And Ammar says they had come into some money from one of the battles of Islam, and from the war booty, Ammar had a share, and Ammar says, I'll give you my war booty, give me this necklace. The man says, that's sufficient. He takes the money, gives him the necklace, sells the necklace, and the man leaves on his journey, buys his horse, buys his clothes, buys his food. Ammar takes this necklace home and realizes Ammar has some ma'rifah. He says, this is the property of the daughter of Rasulullah. And he says, I have an opportunity to gift her something. So he takes it, he perfumes it, wraps it nicely, and takes one of the servants of his house, and he says, go take this to the house of Fatima and give this to her, and now you stay with her, and you work for her now. So sure enough, the servant goes to the house of Bibi Fatima, knocks on the door, and says, Ammar sent me, and he sent this gift for you, and says that now I work for you, I'm your servant. Bibi Fatima takes the gift, realizes it's a necklace, says, Alhamdulillah, takes your necklace back, and says, as for you as a servant, I don't need you, you're free, go on your way. There's no need for you here. The narration says that we saw this man laughing in the middle of the streets of Medina. And when someone asked him, why are you laughing? He says, I have seen the barakat of the house of Zahra. I said, what do you mean? He says, I saw a necklace, feed someone, give them a horse, give them clothing, give them money, and free a servant, and then return back to its owner from where it began. He says, there is no house that has a barakat like this. This is an association of understanding in terms of the spirituality and how Allah repays that who gives charity in His way. You see, charity isn't just about the dollar amount. Charity has more to do with the sacrifice. What are you willing to give up for Allah? That sacrifice is what earns the status with Allah. What am I giving from my desire for the sake of Allah? What am I giving from what's mine, intimately mine, for the sake of Allah? When we look at this story, whether we take a look at this or we take a look at, for example, in Surah Al-Insan, the story that describes وَيُطْعِمُونَ الطَّعَامَ عَلَى حُبِّهِ مِسْكِينًا وَيَتِيمًا وَأَسِيرًا, which talks about the story of the Ahlul Bayt when they fasted for 3 days and they gave away their food to those who were in need. It wasn't about the amount of food that they gave away. It was about the sacrifice that they made that raised their status in the eyes of Allah. When we have opportunities to give charity, think about, and that's it, charity isn't just about money. Charity is about time. Charity is about patience. Charity is about doing that extra good that is difficult to do, that causes me to go through discomfort to achieve that level. That the compensation for it is the way that Sayyidah Zahra's charity is showing compensation. That Allah returns you to where you came from and gives you even better than what you had before it. And this attribute is one of the most important elements of understanding the greatness of charity and the yaqeen that Allah gives. If we didn't have these stories to associate with, maybe we would doubt, can Allah really do that for us? But here Allah is showing you that her sacrifice was she took what was personally hers, what was intimately hers, and gave it in the way of Allah without consideration to the consequence. And what did Allah do? Returned it to her and gave her the barakat of offering all of these great assistances. I'm not saying, you forego your coffee and you give charity that Allah will give you a cup of coffee for free. Maybe He will. But the significance is that what Allah compensates you with for what you're giving is better than what you could achieve on your own. The final of these lessons, Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali. One of the things that we have as a community is the visitation of graves. Ziyarat al-Qubur. Ziyarat al-Qubur is not something we came up with. It's not something we initiated. It's the sunnah of Sayyidah Zahra. It was a regular practice of Bibi Fatima. Now some can argue with you that how many times did the Prophet go to the grave of his mother? He did. But how many times did he go? The Prophet went to a grave once or twice, and they say that that isn't sufficient for us to set the precedent that visiting graves is a good thing. Come to Bibi Fatima. After the Battle of Uhud, which is the second battle of Islam, where her uncle is martyred and is known as Sayyid al-Shuhada, Master of Martyrs, Hazrat Hamza, Bibi Fatima had a practice of going to his grave on Tuesdays and Fridays. Every Tuesday and every Friday she went to his grave and would sit there and pray for him. That the ziyarat of graves is not something we came up with and we established as something as a tradition that, for example, we want to show. No. This was something taught to us by the Ahlul Bayt, and it was something in the life of the Prophet that was established as the practice of his daughter to be consistent, which proved 2 points. 1, that visiting of a grave is a good thing and it should be done, and 2, that women visiting graves is not a problem. As a matter of fact, it is a sunnah of the family of the Prophet to do this, and if there was anyone the Prophet would have stopped from this action, it would be his very daughter. But he didn't. And further, it was promoted. It goes even further than that. You remember that tasbih we talked about in the first example? Famously, and there are 2 or 3 different narrations about this. One narration says that when Sayyidah Zahra established the tasbih, that she took some blue string and she made knots in it, and that was the first concept of tasbih. Others come to the aspect of saying that no, the tasbih that was initially done was done on the hands and was done on the fingers, and the counting on the fingers, and that was done until after the shahadat of Hamza, when Sayyidah Zahra goes and takes the clay of the grave of Hazrat Hamza and makes a tasbih from that clay. Today, if we have these tasbih of khaq shifa, if we have these possessions that come with us, and the aspect of holding on to this tasbih is not something that we established, or it's a love that we uniquely have. No, this was an introduction to this process, an association with these qubur, and how to worship Allah, and that seeking Allah's intercession through these personalities was a lesson taught by the Prophet's family. It's one of the spiritual traditions that is left to us by Bibi Fatima. But how unfortunate that lady, who teaches us to visit graves, who teaches us to visit the shuhada, who teaches us to visit the special personalities in the history of Islam, but that we can't visit her grave. That when you come to the city of Medina, you can say salam to the Prophet, you can say salam to her children, but in which direction do you turn to if you want to say salam to her? This is that lady who in her final will and testament makes the statement to Amir al-Mu'mineen, and she says to him, Ya Ali, غسلني حنتني كفني ودفني بالليل. Oh Ali, take care of all of my affairs in the night and bury me in the night. Don't let anyone know where I am buried. Imagine how difficult those final days were for her, how much they tortured and abused her, that she came to the conclusion that I want no one to know where my grave is. They made it such that even when she would cry, they would not let her cry. That the description says that when Zahra would weep, they came to Amir al-Mu'mineen and said, tell Zahra to either cry in the day or cry in the night. We cannot stand her crying day and night. Do you know why? She was Hawra Insiya, the angelic being in human form. The sound of her crying was pain upon the souls of people. O Mu'mineen, O Muslimeen, did you not realize how much pain that you have put the daughter of Rasulullah in? Imam Ali had to build what was called the house of sorrows outside of Medina, behind Jannatul Baqi, for Sayyidah Zahra to go and cry. It was narrated in the morning, Amir al-Mu'mineen would take Sayyidah Zahra and Imam Hassan, Imam Hussain, take them to this house outside that was built under a tree. And then in the evening, he would bring them back from this location so that Zahra could cry and that people were not disturbed. This is that same lady who then said, I don't want any of these people to come to my grave. I don't want them to know where I am buried. In these final days, it is narrated that she was in such pain and difficulty that they said she did not do much until all of a sudden we saw she had a great amount of energy. She washed and fed the children herself. And then she had a conversation with Amir al-Mu'mineen. Oh Ali, have I ever done anything that would upset you? Hasha lillah ya Zahra, you have never done anything to bother me. Oh Ali, these are the instructions of my burial. Oh Ali, one more thing I say. When I die, do not leave my grave alone. The grave is a very lonely place. Come and visit me from time to time. They describe after these instructions, Amir al-Mu'mineen leaves to the masjid. The children go out to play. She turns to Ayman and she says, oh Ayman, I am going to go lay in my place of ibadat. And I will do the dhikr of Allah. If you hear my voice stop, know that I have left this world. But if you call to me and I answer you, then I am still here. Ayman says, for some time I would hear the mention and dhikr of Allah coming from Zahra. After some time, this dhikr ended. I called to her, but I heard no answer. I covered her face. Soon after, the children came home. They said, we want to go to our mother. I said, oh children, your mother is tired. Why don't you come and eat something? They say, oh Ayman, have you ever seen us eat without our mother? She says, no, but your mother is resting. Let her rest. They said, oh Ayman, we are the coolness of our mother's eyes. She will feel better when she sees us. Let us go to our mother. They describe and say that Ayman could not resist anymore. The children ran into their mother's room. They went by her, and from one side Hassan would call out and say, oh mother, answer me, I am your Hassan. From another side, Abu Abdullah stood. This child says, oh mother, my soul will leave my body if you don't answer me. I am your beloved Hussain who has come to you. They describe and say that Imam Hassan as a child lifted the cloth off of the face of his mother, turned to his brother and said, "A'zam Allah laka al-ajr." Allah increase your reward, our mother has died. The two children ran from the house. They ran to their father in the masjid. They said, "Baba, our mother has left us, our mother has died." They describe and say, Amir al-Mu'mineen stood up, began to walk, and then he sat down. Again, he stood up in confusion and sat down. Finally, they describe and say, "Oh Ali, you are the victor of many battles. You are the champion who cannot be moved from your place. You were the one when Khaybar happened, you would not turn around to come back to Rasulullah. You walked backwards. Now today you don't know to stand or sit." He says, "My Zahra, the partner in my life, has left me. Ali does not know how to proceed from this moment forward or backwards. What am I to do now?" They describe this was one of the most difficult times in the life of Amir al-Mu'mineen, but the pain of this moment went further. They describe in that night that it was Salman who would give water, Amir al-Mu'mineen who was behind a curtain, Ayman who was assisting in the ghusl of Sayyidah Zahra. They describe at one moment under the cloth when Amir al-Mu'mineen was doing ghusl, he left the room, came outside, facing a corner, began to weep. They said, "Oh Ali, what, as you are the patient one who has gone through so much difficulty, why are you crying?" He says, "I have found on Zahra such wounds that she did not even reveal to me." One mu'arrikh, one of the historians narrates, he says, Amir al-Mu'mineen, as he poured the water, his hand touched the broken ribs of Zahra. He became aware of the difficulty Zahra had been this entire time. He could not take it anymore. Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Ridan bi qada'ihi wa tasliman li amrih. على لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين. يا الله بحق فاطمة وأبيها وبعلها وبنيها والسر المستودع فيها. Ya Allah, by the right of Bibi Fatima, her father, her husband, her children, and her secrets that she gave to us. Ya Allah, accept this small ibadah from us. Ya Allah, give the thawab of this majlis to our marhumin and all of the mu'mineen. Oh Allah, we have gathered here with hajat by the right of the mention of Sayyidah Zahra. Fulfill our hajat. Oh Allah, there are those amongst our families, our communities suffering through sickness and disease. Give shafa'at to the mu'mineen wherever they are. Oh Allah, there are those who are suffering through strife and insecurity and difficulty. Give aman to the mu'mineen, muslimin wherever they are. Oh Allah, hasten the reappearance of Sahib al-Zaman. Keep us and our children on the upright path of Islam. Oh Allah, give us tawfiq to support the Imam of our time. Entitle us to the ziyarat of Imam Hussain in this world and Shifa of Imam Hussain in the hereafter. One surah Fatiha for all of our marhumeen with your loudest of salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. متوجه الزيارة إن شاء الله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليك يا رسول الله، السلام عليك يا نبي الله، السلام عليك يا حبيب الله وخاتم النبيين، السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين علي بن أبي طالب، السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة النساء العالمين، السلام عليك يا أبا محمد حسن بن علي المجتبى، السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله الحسين الشهيد بكربلاء، السلام عليك يا تسعة المعصومين من ذرية الحسين، علي بن الحسين زين العابدين، ومحمد بن علي باقر علم النبيين، وجعفر بن محمد الصادق، وموسى بن جعفر الكاظم، وعلي بن موسى الرضا، ومحمد بن علي الجواد، وعلي بن محمد الهادي، والحسن بن علي العسكري، وحجة الله يا ابن الحسن يا صاحب العصر والزمان. عجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله تعالى مخرجك وظهورك وجعلنا